An Iowa man has been charged in a 1989 cold case disappearance, the first case to see an arrest from the State Attorney General's new cold case unit. On May 6, 1989, Barbara Lenz went missing at the age of 31 after being dropped off at her Woodbine apartment in Iowa by her then-boyfriend Robert Davis. She was expected to visit her former boyfriend and the father of her 3-year-old child in Omaha, Nebraska, but she did not show up. Barbara's family contacted the Woodbine Police Department on May 17th after they have not had any contact with her since May 3rd. The police and her family members entered Barbara's apartment, but she was not home, and they found that her pets had not been cared for in some time. Her personal effects, including her purse, wallet, clothing, luggage, etc., were there, indicating a lack of preparation for a long absence. There was no sign of any struggle, and nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. Barbara had not told anyone in her family or her friends that she was planning to leave or go anywhere. The police determined that Robert was the last person to have seen Barbara alive. He told the investigators that she had called him from Omaha to say that she was with her daughter, but the police determined that she never arrived there. During the course of the investigation, the police found that Barbara had told several people that she feared Robert. Shortly before her disappearance, Barbara told at least 2 people that Robert said that he would end her life if she left him. Barbara was also allegedly assaulted by Robert on several known occasions during their 2-year relationship, including incidents during which she was allegedly strangled until she fell unconscious. There was also an incident where Robert allegedly hit Barbara's daughter at a restaurant in front of Barbara and other witnesses. Robert admitted these incidents to the police. He told the police that he did not like it when she went to Nebraska to visit Lindsay and Lindsay's father. He also said that he and Barbara argued before her May 6th visit. One witness alleged that Robert injured Barbara after slashing her cheek with a sharp object, while another claimed that they saw the two leaving the apartment. The witness who saw Robert injure Barbara saw him at a local bar in Woodbine the same evening. The witness said, during this encounter, Robert claimed to be looking for Barbara and he could not find her. The witness said that his behavior seemed misplaced because Robert had just left the bar with Barbara a short time earlier. A different witness later informed the investigators that shortly after Barbara's disappearance, they saw Robert and his brother bury something in a rural area near Robert's home. Robert's brother visited the property with the witness and showed the witness where he had dug a hole for his brother and helped him bury something wrapped in plastic. The complaint did not say if the area was excavated or what was wrapped in the plastic. Other witnesses told the investigators that Robert told them they would end up like Barbara after arguments. Barbara's remains were not found, and the case went cold. Finally, after 17 years of no answers, a lead came through after mushroom hunters found the skeletal remains of a woman in a 55-gallon barrel that were thought to be Barbara. Dental records later determined that it was not Barbara. The case was then reopened and re-investigated. Because of Richard Davis's behavior and history with Barbara, the investigators believed that he ended Barbara's life with malice aforethought, willfully, deliberately, and with premeditation. He was then arrested on March 10th, 2025. He was charged in the first degree. An attorney was not listed for him. Barbara's daughter, Lindsay Baumgart, said that Davis's arrest was very surreal and something that I have waited for my whole life. She said the following, "I never thought this day would come," and added that she hopes investigators can finally locate her mother's remains. "Justice for me would be bringing my mama home." Court documents stated that Davis filed a written plea of not guilty on April 5th and waived his right to a speedy trial. He is currently being held in the Harrison County Jail. No court date has yet been set. In May 2015, Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. and his fiancée were walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, when their night took a tragic turn. For nearly a decade, Calvin's family was left without justice. Army Sergeant Calvin Wilhite Jr. was born in 1989. From an early age, he had a strong sense of duty, which led him to join an American army. As a soldier, he demonstrated unwavering dedication, rising through the ranks to become a sergeant. Over the course of 8 years, Calvin served honorably, including a deployment to Iraq, where he faced the harsh realities of war and survived. He was engaged to his fiancée, with whom he shared 2 children. He embraced fatherhood with pride, ensuring that his children were well cared for. On the night of May 24, 2015, Calvin and his fiancée were walking through downtown Memphis, Tennessee, after spending the evening on Beale Street. The popular entertainment district was bustling with activity, filled with music, laughter, and crowds enjoying the night. As the couple made their way along South 4th Street, near the FedEx Forum, their peaceful walk took a sudden and dangerous turn. A dark-colored vehicle approached, carrying 3 men inside. Instead of passing by, the men directed their attention toward Calvin's fiancée, yelling remarks at her. The situation quickly escalated when Calvin, unwilling to ignore the harassment, confronted them. What began as an exchange of words soon became a heated argument. Tensions rose in an instant, and the night took a fatal turn. One of the men inside the vehicle suddenly produced a firearm. Before Calvin had a chance to react, gunfire erupted. He was struck 3 times, collapsing onto the pavement as his fiancée watched in horror. The attack was swift and merciless, leaving bystanders shocked and unable to intervene. The sounds of the gunshots echoed through the streets, cutting through the usual city noise. At approximately 12:05 a.m., officers from the Memphis Police Department's Entertainment District unit responded to reports of the shooting. When the authorities arrived, they found Calvin lying on the ground, critically wounded. The scene was chaotic, with bystanders in shock and confusion. The assailants wasted no time fleeing the scene, speeding off in their vehicle and disappearing into the night. The vehicle fled southbound, crossing Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, disappearing into the night. The attack had been swift and calculated, leaving little opportunity for intervention. Emergency responders worked quickly to get Calvin medical attention. He was rushed to Regional 1 Hospital, where doctors and medical staff fought to save his life. Despite their efforts, the injuries he sustained were too severe. The gunshot wounds had inflicted irreversible damage, and shortly after his arrival, Calvin was pronounced deceased. The life of a devoted soldier, father, and fiancé was stolen in an instant. Following his end, an investigation was launched to identify the perpetrators after the Shelby County Medical Examiner officially confirmed that Calvin had been deliberately and violently taken from his family. Law enforcement officers scoured the area for evidence, reviewing surveillance footage and interviewing witnesses. The authorities worked tirelessly to gather information about the suspects. Witnesses provided descriptions of the 2 men involved in the fatal shooting. The driver was described as a black male between 22 and 25 years old, with a light complexion, hazel eyes, and a distinctive high-fade hairstyle with curls on top. His accomplice, the shooter, was also a black male of the same age range, but had a darker complexion and a chubby face. He wore his hair in a fade style and had a small to medium build. The details of their appearance became critical leads in the case, offering investigators a starting point in their pursuit of justice. The shooter's actions were particularly chilling. He had positioned himself on the passenger door frame of the vehicle as it moved down the street, making him more visible to bystanders. He wore a white t-shirt, which stood out under the streetlights. With calculated precision, he fired the fatal shots before the car sped away. The brazenness of the attack left many shaken, as it demonstrated the shooter's willingness to take a life in a public setting without hesitation. The investigators also focused on the vehicle involved in the crime. Witnesses described it as a light green or gray 4-door sedan, potentially a mid-2000s Dodge Stratus, Ford Taurus, or a similar model. This information was crucial in narrowing the search, but the lack of a visible license plate or identifying marks made tracking the vehicle difficult. Surveillance footage was reviewed in hopes of capturing clearer images of the suspects or the car, but results were inconclusive. The men responsible had vanished into the night. A $20,000 reward was offered for information leading to their arrest. A significant incentive meant to motivate witnesses or those who may have had contact with the perpetrators. Despite efforts from law enforcement, the case went cold. Then, in May 2024, almost a decade later, a breakthrough finally came. After years of little progress, detectives finally received new information regarding a suspect's potential involvement in the case. This crucial lead reignited the investigation and provided a long-awaited opportunity to move forward. In February 2025, the investigation ultimately led to the arrest of a suspect identified as 33-year-old Timothy Davis. Law enforcement officials confirmed that he had been taken into custody, marking a pivotal moment in the nearly decade-old case. Davis was formally charged in the second degree. The court set his bond at $250,000, marking a significant development in the long, unsolved case. While his arrest provided a breakthrough, questions remained about the full scope of his involvement and whether additional suspects would also be brought to justice. The investigators continued working to determine if Davis was the gunman or if he played another role in the crime. In a statement to the Wilhite family, the deputy chief of police acknowledged their years of suffering. He expressed deep sympathy for the pain and grief they had endured since that tragic night in 2015. He said, "To the Wilhite family, we know the past several years have been filled with grief and uncertainty. While we cannot undo the pain that you have endured, we hope that knowing someone is now being held accountable brings you some measure of relief and help in your healing process." For Calvin's mother, Davis's arrest was an important step, but it did not erase the sorrow of losing her son. She remained focused on the fact that another suspect was still out there, walking free after nearly a decade. She expressed her frustration that it had taken so long for justice to reach this point, knowing that someone out there had information that could have brought closure much sooner. She said, "We just wanted justice to come for my son, because we knew that somebody that knew of the cowards that took my son's life was out here." While Davis's arrest brings a measure of relief, the case is not yet fully closed, as at least one suspect remains at large. The pursuit of justice continues, and for Calvin's loved ones, the fight is not over until everyone involved in his tragic demise is brought before the law. In October 1984, in Arkansas, workers made the grim discovery of an abandoned body of a man. For nearly 40 years, the unidentified victim remained a haunting enigma, his story lost to time. On October 30th, 1984, workers from the Department of Transportation were mowing the grass along Interstate 40 in Arkansas when they made a gruesome discovery. The body of a man was found, lying abandoned near the roadway. Law enforcement was immediately called to the scene, and an investigation was launched. Due to the state of decomposition, identifying the man was difficult. There was nothing on him to indicate who he was, and without identification, the investigators were left with few leads. An autopsy was conducted, and the medical examiner determined that the man had lost his life due to strangulation. The cause of demise confirmed that his end was no accident, but without knowing his identity, the investigation stalled. The forensic tools available in 1984 were limited, and without DNA analysis or advanced identification methods, the case grew colder with each passing year. For 4 decades, the unidentified man remained a mystery, until 2024, when the Arkansas State Police reopened the cold case, hoping that advancements in forensic technology could finally solve the decades-old mystery. Investigators sent the remains to a specialized DNA facility in Texas, where experts conducted thorough testing. After years of uncertainty, a breakthrough finally emerged in March 2025. The facility identified the remains as belonging to Earl James McDaniel, a 53-year-old man originally from Kansas City, Missouri. To confirm the identity beyond doubt, Investigators compared Earl James's DNA with that of his daughter, who was living in Washington state. Earl James was born in 1931. He was from Kansas City, Missouri. He only had the one daughter. He had a difficult life while growing up, which led him to a life of crime. He had a criminal history, including time spent in prison in Washington state in the 1960s and numerous arrests throughout the country in the 1980s. His life was marked by repeated encounters with law enforcement, and he often found himself entangled in legal troubles. Despite this, he continued to move from place to place, leaving behind a trail of offenses that painted a picture of a troubled and restless man. But while one mystery was solved, another remained. Who was responsible for ending his life? Records showed that Earl James had last been seen alive on September 11, 1984. On that day, he had been pulled over for drunk driving in Oskaloosa. After his arrest, there were no further official records of his movements. The Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit turned its attention to piecing together Earl James's final days. They sought information from anyone who may have encountered him between his arrest in September and the discovery of his body in late October. Strangulation as the cause of demise suggested a personal and deliberate act, raising questions about whether Earl James had been targeted by someone he knew. As investigators worked to fill in the blanks, they remained determined to uncover the truth behind the decades-old crime. If you have any information, contact the Arkansas State Police. In November 1973, in Colorado, hunters near the St. Vrain River stumbled upon skeletal remains. Lacking leads, the case quickly grew cold, and for nearly 50 years, she was known only as Jane Doe, 1973. On November 19, 1973, the remains of a woman whom authorities referred to as Jane Doe, 1973, were discovered near the bank of the St. Vrain River. The location was north of Colorado Highway 66 and approximately 4 miles west of Platteville. The skeletal remains were found by hunters who happened to be in the area. At the time, investigators struggled to determine the young woman's identity, as there were no immediate clues linking her to any missing persons cases. Given the limitations of forensic technology in the 1970s, authorities were unable to determine her name, background, or the circumstances that led to her end. Investigators suspected foul play, but without a name or missing persons report to match, the trail went silent. The case quickly went cold. Over the years, forensic advancements gave authorities new hope in solving long-standing mysteries like this one. In the decades that followed, detectives periodically revisited the case, hoping that new technology would one day provide answers. Families of missing persons continued searching for their loved ones, unaware that one of them might have already been found without recognition. Through a search, detectives were able to locate the victim's remains at Lynn Grove Cemetery in Greeley. Despite the passage of nearly 5 decades, advancements in forensic technology presented a new opportunity to finally uncover her identity. In April 2022, investigators made the decision to exhume the remains in hopes of obtaining a usable DNA sample. Forensic experts carefully extracted genetic material, and with the help of modern techniques, they began the painstaking process of analyzing the sample for genetic genealogy testing. 2 years later, in February 2024, a breakthrough was made. A forensic genealogy analyst from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation provided a genetic genealogy report to the Weld County Sheriff's Office. The findings in the report indicated a strong likelihood that the unidentified remains, known for decades as Jane Doe, 1973, belonged to 15-year-old Roxanne Colleen Leadbeater. With this new information in hand, investigators sought to notify Roxanne's surviving family members. However, they soon learned that both of her parents and her brother had passed away in the years following the discovery of her remains. The people who had once searched desperately for her were no longer alive to receive the news that she had finally been found. Roxanne was born in 1958. She was from Los Angeles, California. She lived near Redondo Beach with her parents and brother. Her family cherished her, and she shared a close bond with them. Roxanne attended Lawndale High School. She was a typical teenager who enjoyed spending time with loved ones. However, everything changed on a fateful day when Roxanne's family noticed her absence. She had not returned home as expected, and concern quickly turned into panic. Her parents and brother searched for her in the places she frequently visited, hoping to find a clue to her whereabouts. As time passed with no sign of her, fear settled in, and the family knew something was terribly wrong. Roxanne had never disappeared without informing them before, and this unusual silence was alarming. Desperate for answers, her family reached out to her friends, asking if anyone had seen or heard from her. Unfortunately, no one had any information about her location. As the days passed, anxiety grew among those who knew her. Roxanne's parents clung to the hope that she would return safely, but deep down, they feared the worst. It was a bittersweet moment. While the mystery of her identity had been solved, those who had loved her the most would never know the truth. Determined to find the closest living relatives, the detectives reached out to Roxanne's first cousins. Unfortunately, their search revealed that the cousins had not been close to Roxanne or her immediate family. Roxanne's relatives informed detectives that they all recalled her going missing around 1972, when she was just 15 years old. This information aligned with what investigators already suspected, confirming that her disappearance had gone unnoticed by law enforcement for decades. However, when detectives reached out to multiple law enforcement agencies in California, they encountered a troubling obstacle. None of the agencies had any records of Roxanne being reported as a missing person. It was as if her disappearance had never been officially documented, adding another layer of mystery to an already complicated case. In January 2025, the forensic genealogy analyst from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, CBI, confirmed with certainty that Jane Doe 1973 was, in fact, Roxanne Leadbeater. This conclusion was based on the kinship comparison between her remains and her cousin's DNA. Though it had taken over 5 decades, Roxanne's name was finally restored, and her family could acknowledge the truth of what had happened to her. CBI director emphasized the significance of this breakthrough, highlighting how advances in DNA technology have changed the way cold cases are solved. The director stated, "This case highlights the importance of preserving evidence, even for decades-old crimes. Advancements in DNA technology have given us a powerful tool to help solve cold cases and bring long overdue answers to the families of victims who were never forgotten." But as one mystery was solved, another emerged. How had she disappeared without a trace? And who was responsible for her fate? How had a 15-year-old girl disappeared without a trace, only to be found states away, nearly 1,000 miles away in Colorado? Why had no record of her missing persons report existed? The investigation into Roxanne Colleen Leadbeater's demise remains open, as authorities have yet to determine both the cause and manner. On October 5, 1999, in Connecticut, a family's world was turned upside down when 23-month-old Andrea Reyes vanished without a trace. Despite immediate efforts to locate her, the case quickly stalled, and as the years passed, Andrea remained missing. Andrea Michelle Reyes was born in 1997. When she was 23 months old, her parents, Carlos Reyes and Rosa Tenorio, were married, but their relationship was troubled. They faced numerous issues in their marriage, which eventually led to their decision to part ways. The separation, however, was not without conflict, as both parents struggled over who would gain custody of their child. As tensions escalated, the custody battle made its way to court. After legal proceedings, the judge ruled in favor of Andrea's father, granting him sole custody. On October 5, 1999, an unimaginable event shook Andrea's family. Andrea, who was living with her father in New Haven, Connecticut, was taken from her home. The authorities were immediately notified, and an investigation was launched. law enforcement officers began gathering evidence, speaking with neighbors, and searching the surrounding areas for any sign of Andrea. Authorities quickly identified Andrea's mother, Rosa, as the primary suspect in the abduction. Since she did not have legal custody of her daughter, investigators believed she had taken Andrea and fled to Mexico, specifically to the city of Puebla. Despite immediate efforts to locate them, including issuing an arrest warrant for custodial interference, authorities were unable to track Tenorio down. As time passed without new leads, the case gradually went cold, and Andrea remained missing for decades. Although the search efforts slowed, Andrea's father never gave up hope. He refused to accept the possibility that his daughter was gone forever and remained determined to bring her home. Over the years, he made multiple trips to Mexico, following leads that suggested his daughter was still living there under the care of her mother. In 2023, 24 years later, the New Haven Police Department made the decision to reopen the cold case. The authorities were determined to revisit old leads and utilize modern investigative techniques. Through a combination of interviews, search warrants, and the use of social media, investigators were able to track Andrea's possible whereabouts. Their efforts eventually led them to Puebla, Mexico, where they believed Andrea had been living for years. As authorities worked to confirm her identity, they partnered with Othram. Given the complexity of the case and the passage of time, DNA analysis was the most reliable method to determine whether the woman found in Puebla was indeed Andrea Reyes. In March 2025, Othram completed the DNA testing and officially confirmed Andrea's identity. With her identity verified, 27-year-old Andrea was given the opportunity to reunite with her father. After decades of separation, the long-awaited moment was finally within reach. The emotional reunion marked the end of a painful chapter in their lives and the beginning of a new one. Andrea has been able to reunite with her father after decades of separation, but she has not relocated to the United States. She continues to reside in Mexico, the country where she spent most of her life after being taken from her home as a child. While her reunion with her father has been confirmed, many details about her current life remain private. The nature of her relationship with her mother, Rosa Tenorio, is still unclear, and it is unknown whether the two remain in contact. Despite the legal barriers, law enforcement officials continue to monitor the case, keeping Tenorio's fugitive status active in official records. While her whereabouts are suspected, there has been no confirmation of her exact location or any immediate plans to bring her back to the U.S. to face charges. Without cooperation from Mexican authorities, efforts to extradite her remain stalled. The 1975 cold case of a Maryland woman was finally solved with the help of an old cassette tape and a photo of the victim. On August 24, 1975, 20-year-old Roseann Sturtz was strangled after meeting someone at TikTok Club on Utah Street in downtown Baltimore, Maryland. A relative reported her missing later that evening. Her body was found 4 months later, in December, in a wooded area of Columbia. The case was a mystery for decades until the Howard County Police revived it 49 years after the crime, in late 2024. They uncovered evidence that a convicted perpetrator, already in prison, had committed the crime. The detectives discovered a 1981 audio tape in which Charles William Davis Jr., then incarcerated at Jessup Correctional Institute, was asked about the case in exchange for not facing charges. In 1981, Davis could not identify Roseann, who went by Ann, as one of his victims after he was shown a photo taken of her several years before the crime took place. Davis landed on the authorities' radar in 1981 after the police studied his confirmed victims and compared them to Roseann. But Howard County Police Corporal Wade Zufel then brought Davis from the same jail to the police headquarters in 2024 to interview him again 44 years later. He showed Davis a later photo of Roseann, a headshot taken a month before her life was ended. This time, he identified her as one of his victims and admitted to the slaying. Footage released from the interview shows Davis nodding his head as he took a look at the photo. Roseann's family said the following in a statement through the police department. In November 2024, we were grateful to have all the case details, learned Roseann's actual date of demise, and received the closure we have been praying for all these years, finally put to rest the answers we never had. 77-year-old Davis told the police that after meeting Roseann at a bar, the pair got into an argument before he took her life. Davis cannot be charged in this case, but he is already in prison for life for other crimes. Corporal Zufall said, his main reason why he wanted to talk to me was he wanted to give closure to the family. The case was finally declared solved 5 decades later in March 2025. On the night of July 27, 2001 in Missouri, a devoted mother and wife vanished without a trace after telling her daughter she was heading to the store. The case was initially linked to a notorious serial offender, but the breakthrough would only happen more than 2 decades later. Carol Hemphill was born on June 10, 1962. At 39 years old, she was married and the proud mother of 2 daughters. On the night of July 27, 2001, in St. Louis, Missouri, she told her daughter that she was heading to the store but never returned. There were no initial signs of trouble, making the situation even more puzzling. As the hours turned into days, Carol's family grew increasingly worried. They reported her missing to the authorities, hoping for any leads that could explain her sudden vanishing. The police launched an investigation, speaking to friends, family, and local store employees to gather any possible information. However, there were no witnesses who could confirm seeing Carol after she left her home that night. Her car was also unaccounted for. Her family tirelessly searched for answers, distributing flyers, and pleading with the public for any information. Local news stations covered her case, amplifying the urgency of her disappearance. Despite their efforts, there were no immediate breakthroughs. Law enforcement suspected that Carol had fallen victim to Maury Troy Travis, a notorious serial offender. Travis was linked to multiple crimes in the St. Louis area, preying on vulnerable women and torturing his victims in his home. Given the circumstances of Carol's disappearance, the authorities believed that there was a strong possibility that she had been one of his victims. However, without definitive proof, they could not confirm the connection at the time. Carol's husband revealed that Travis was not a stranger to their community. He was a familiar figure in the neighborhood where their family lived, making the possibility of his involvement even more unsettling. Adding to the growing concerns, Carol's daughter recalled that a close acquaintance of a family member had seen Travis in their area. Travis is believed to have ended the lives of between 12 and 20 women across Missouri and Illinois between 2000 and 2002. However, despite the overwhelming evidence found in his home, including torture videos and maps of possible burial sites, Travis never admitted to any of the crimes. Before the authorities could press charges for all the suspected crimes, Travis took his own life. On June 10, 2002, while being held at the St. Louis County Jail in Clayton, Missouri, he hanged himself in his cell at the age of 36. His passing robbed many families of the chance to confront him in court and receive direct answers about their loved ones. And the case of Carol went cold. Nearly 8 months after Carol Hemphill's disappearance, a grim discovery was made. On March 28, 2002, Illinois Department of Transportation, IDOT workers, stumbled upon human remains in a creek bed along Route 3 near Gall Road in Columbia, Illinois. The authorities launched an investigation, but were initially unable to determine the identity of the remains. With no immediate forensic leads, the case remained open as the investigators worked to uncover the truth. 2 decades later, in 2022, a breakthrough opportunity emerged when a grant provided funding for genetic genealogy research. This innovative approach, which had helped solve other cold cases, offered new hope for identifying the remains. As part of this effort, portions of the remains were sent to a specialized lab at the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification. Scientists at the facility worked to extract viable DNA, with the goal of connecting her genetic profile to potential relatives. In late October 2024, a major breakthrough finally came in Carol Hemphill's case. After years of uncertainty, a lab report revealed a close genetic connection between the remains and a DNA sample from her deceased biological son. This critical finding brought new hope that her identity could finally be confirmed. To strengthen the results, living family members were asked to submit their own DNA for further comparison, ensuring the most accurate identification possible. Months of detailed forensic analysis followed, as scientists worked to verify the match. Finally, on February 24, 2025, the final lab results conclusively confirmed that the remains discovered in the creek bed over 2 decades earlier belonged to Carol Hemphill. On March 14, 2025, the Columbia Police Department publicly announced the official identification of Carol. The confirmation was a significant development in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 24 years. The authorities continued to suspect that Carol was a victim of Maury Troy Travis, given the timeline of her disappearance and the proximity of her remains to areas associated with him. However, without a direct confession or definitive physical evidence linking him to this crime, law enforcement could not close the case. Katricia Hemphill, Carol's daughter, said, "It is a bittersweet moment. It means a lot. It still hurts pretty bad. I have been waiting for this day for a long time." She said these words while holding something she has longed for, her mother's ashes, a tangible piece of the woman she has spent decades searching for. Along with them, the memories that time could never erase. She said, "God finally answered all my prayers." But in her mind, it is not over yet. She explained, "I definitely want justice. This is just halfway. We are not at the end until justice is served. For whoever it is, they did whatever they did. I want justice. And I know these guys, they're going to keep working on it." Ricky Hemphill, Carol's husband, who is now 63 and now lives in Houston, said that he went to lay down after dinner on the night his wife was last seen by loved ones. He was 18 when he first met his wife and said she was a loving person. He said everybody loved her and she loved everybody. She really was an open person. She was a happy person. She was a wonderful woman. In 1997, in Sasakwa, Oklahoma, 81-year-old Gerthie Carolina was found lifeless on her kitchen floor, the victim of a vicious attack. What appeared to be a random act of violence against an elderly woman soon revealed a web of financial greed, betrayal, and shocking confessions. Gerthie Carolina was born in 1918 and lived a long, fulfilling life. At 81 years old, she resided in Sasakwa, Oklahoma, where she had spent most of her years. She was once married but later lost her husband, leaving her to navigate life alone. Despite never having children of her own, she found immense joy in her extended family and was deeply connected to the people in her community. As the years passed, Gerthie became increasingly aware that her time on Earth was limited. She wanted to ensure that her affairs were in order before she passed away. Understanding the importance of a legal will and trust, she carefully considered her options. After much thought, she made the decision to transfer ownership of her property to her niece, Carolyn Foreman, and her grandniece, Dakota Davis. It was her wish that after she was gone, the two would inherit everything she had worked hard for. However, what she believed was a responsible and loving decision would ultimately lead to devastating consequences. By signing over her assets, Gerthie unknowingly set off a chain of events that would forever alter the course of her life. She trusted that her family would honor her wishes and care for her as she lived out her final years. Unfortunately, what followed was far from what she had envisioned. On August 11, 1997, just 4 months after filing her will and trust, Gerthie was brutally attacked in her home. That afternoon, her niece, Carolyn Foreman, and her grandniece, Dakota Davis, who were 53 and 17 years old at the time, claimed to have arrived at Gerthie's home around 3:15 p.m. Their reason for visiting, they said, was to take her to a doctor's appointment, as she had not been feeling well. What they discovered instead was a horrific scene. Carolyn and Dakota alerted the police upon finding Gerthie's lifeless body on the kitchen floor, lying in a pool of blood. Law enforcement officers rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, it was too late. Gerthie was already deceased. An investigation was immediately launched, and the authorities worked to piece together what had happened. The autopsy report revealed that Gerthie's cause of demise was the result of multiple stab wounds, deep incisions, and severe blunt force trauma. The level of violence suggested an attack fueled by rage, leaving the investigators to question who could have committed such a brutal act against an elderly woman. The police interviewed friends, neighbors, and family members, hoping to uncover any clues that might lead to her perpetrator. However, no clear suspects emerged, and the investigation soon faced obstacles. As the months turned into years, Gerthie's case remained unsolved. In 2023, after 26 years of unanswered questions, Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, OSBI agents, decided to re-examine the evidence in Gerthie's case. Advances in forensic technology allowed them to revisit key pieces of evidence that had gone untested for years. Among these items was a shoe collected from the crime scene in 1997. Investigators focused on a blood stain found on the shoe, suspecting it might hold the breakthrough they had long been searching for. In early 2025, testing confirmed what authorities had suspected. The blood on the shoe belonged to Gerthie, and the forensic link pointed directly to Dakota, Gerthie's grandniece. With this undeniable evidence, the investigators finally had the proof they needed to bring charges against those responsible for this brutal crime. Shortly after the discovery, on March 5, 2025, law enforcement arrested both 45-year-old Dakota Davis and her mother, 81-year-old Carolyn Foreman. The two women were charged in the first degree and with conspiracy to take a person's life. The authorities revealed that over the years, multiple individuals had come forward with statements about Dakota's involvement in the crime. According to the affidavits, Dakota had admitted to the crime on several occasions. Some witnesses recalled her describing how she had used a machete to carry out the attack, while others stated that she claimed to have used an axe. The investigators believed that this inconsistency pointed to an attempt to minimize her responsibility or distort the details of the crime. The investigators uncovered even more damning evidence when Dakota's father came forward with shocking details about her past confessions. He recalled that in 2001, Dakota had admitted to ending the life of Gerthie, telling him that she had chopped up the victim. He also stated that Carolyn had been present during the attack, urging Dakota on by shouting, "Hit her again, hit her again." Further investigations revealed that financial greed had been the driving force behind this crime. According to the father's statement, Gerthie had grown increasingly upset before her end because she discovered that Carolyn had been withdrawing money from her bank account to cover personal expenses. Gerthie had always been careful with her finances, but as she aged, she became more dependent on those around her. Unfortunately, this vulnerability made her an easy target for exploitation. The financial motive became even clearer when the authorities traced Gerthie's assets. On August 25, 1996, just a year before her demise, she had purchased a $40,000 certificate of deposit. The following year, she transferred ownership of the CD to a living trust, naming Carolyn as the beneficiary. This decision, meant to secure her financial future, ultimately set the stage for her demise. Investigators believe that Foreman and Davis saw Gerthie as an obstacle standing between them and a large sum of money. Just days after the crime, Foreman wasted no time in cashing out the certificate of deposit. The timing was suspicious, reinforcing law enforcement's belief that the crime had been premeditated. Court documents said, Foreman had a gun, but Davis had an axe. When they arrived at Gerthie's home, Davis threw ammonia on Gerthie's face. Davis then began hitting Gerthie with the axe. Seminole County District Attorney Eric Johnson said in a statement, "This case is a testament to the relentless dedication of these investigators and our unwavering pursuit of justice, even decades after a crime is committed. We hope this brings some measure of peace to Gerthie Carolina's family after all these years." Foreman was previously charged with first-degree slaying in a separate case involving the 1999 shooting fatality of a teenager. However, the charge was later dismissed. Her son Billy Parker was then convicted of the crime in 2007. He is serving a life sentence. On the night of August 18, 1996, in Paris, Texas, Mary Moore Searight, a beloved community figure, was found inside her home, brutally assaulted, and left fighting for her life. Her case went cold as the detectives struggled to find answers, and the crime remained unsolved for nearly 30 years. Mary Moore Searight was born in 1910 in Paris, Texas. She was a proud native of Paris, but eventually relocated to the Austin, Texas area in 1939. It was there that she met her future husband, Dan Searight, an Austinite and the president of the Walter Tips Hardware Company. Their union marked the beginning of a prosperous life together, one that allowed them to acquire several hundred acres of land in Austin. For nearly 30 years, they resided on their ranch, building a legacy that would later become an important part of Austin's history. Throughout her life, Mary showed a deep connection to her land and refused multiple offers to sell it. Even after Dan passed away in the 1950s, she remained steadfast in her vision, managing the land on her own. Developers approached her with multi-million-dollar deals, hoping to turn the property into commercial or residential developments, but she turned them all down. Her dedication ensured that a significant portion of her land remained untouched and preserved for future generations. This decision would later lead to the creation of the Mary Moore Searight Metropolitan Park, a lasting tribute to her generosity and commitment to conservation. Before leaving Austin, Mary made another selfless contribution. She sold approximately 88 acres of her land to the city of Austin, further reinforcing her desire to see the area remain undeveloped. The land she had protected was turned into a public park, allowing future generations to enjoy the open space she had fought to preserve. Even as she prepared to return to her hometown of Paris, she remained deeply respected and cherished by those who knew her. On the night of August 18, 1996, Mary was found inside her home, still alive, but in critical condition. Her unofficial caretaker, who regularly checked on her and brought her food, made the horrifying discovery. Mary had been indecently assaulted, brutally beaten, and strangled. The caretaker, overcome with shock and fear, wasted no time in alerting the authorities. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they found Mary unconscious, her frail body barely clinging to life. Emergency responders quickly transported her to a local hospital, where medical personnel fought to save her. Despite their best efforts, Mary's condition was too severe. The trauma she had endured had left her in an irreversible state. She remained unresponsive, and after 3 days of intensive medical care, she succumbed to her injuries. Mary was pronounced deceased. Following the grim discovery, detectives swarmed Mary's residence, determined to uncover the truth. The crime scene was meticulously examined, with law enforcement officials working late into the night and throughout the following day. They gathered physical evidence from the home, hoping it would provide crucial clues about the perpetrator. Every room was inspected, every item scrutinized. Investigators knew that solving this crime would require patience and precision. Several individuals were interviewed in connection with the case, including neighbors and potential witnesses. Among them was a man who told the detectives that he had seen Mary and had been at her house on the day of the attack. His statement was carefully examined, but it led nowhere concrete. The investigators remained frustrated by the lack of substantial leads. Despite their extensive questioning, none of the interviews provided a clear suspect or a motive. The case was proving to be more complex than anyone had anticipated. The physical evidence collected at the scene was sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Laboratory for thorough analysis. Detectives hoped that forensic testing would yield a breakthrough, but the results were disappointing. One of Mary Moore Searight's tenants, David Paul Caddy Jr., who was 25 years old at the time, became a person of interest early in the investigation. On the evening of the crime, he was among the neighbors questioned by the Paris Police Department. The detectives noted his behavior during the interview. He seemed nervous and attempted to conceal a laceration on his right hand. When asked about the injury, David provided inconsistent explanations, raising further suspicion. The investigators were eager to determine whether his wound was related to the attack on Mary. As part of their investigation, the detectives obtained DNA swabs from his hand. However, despite their efforts, the case did not move forward. At the time, forensic technology had limitations, and the results from the swabs failed to produce any major breakthroughs. With no conclusive evidence linking David or anyone else to the crime, the case grew colder. In 2021, nearly 25 years after Mary's life was ended, the case was re-examined by the Texas Rangers. It was identified as eligible for the Texas Department of Public Safety's DPS Assault Kit Initiative, SAKI program. This initiative, funded by the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance, was designed to provide funding and resources for law enforcement agencies across America. Its primary goal was to revisit and advance unsolved indecent assaults and other related cases, bringing justice to victims and closure to their families. Mary's case, long dormant, was given new life under this initiative. Investigators meticulously reviewed the original evidence, hoping that advancements in forensic technology would uncover information that had previously gone undetected. The hope was that modern DNA analysis techniques would succeed where older methods had failed. As law enforcement officials delved deeper, they reconsidered evidence that had once seemed inconclusive, determined to find the answers that had eluded them for decades. The investigators made a critical decision. The swabs taken from David Paul Caddy Jr.'s hand on the night of the crime were deemed eligible for further forensic analysis. This development reignited the case, giving the detectives renewed hope of solving the mystery surrounding Mary's end. Advanced testing confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Caddy's DNA was present on the evidence. This discovery provided the long-awaited link between him and the brutal attack on Mary. With this crucial piece of evidence, law enforcement officials moved swiftly to take action. The Texas Rangers, in collaboration with the Paris Police Department, formally arrested Caddy. At the time of his arrest, Caddy was already in custody at the Hopkins County Jail for an unrelated crime. His criminal past had kept him behind bars, but he faced far more serious charges now. The authorities wasted no time in transferring him into their custody, ensuring that he would be held accountable for the violent crime that had gone unsolved for so many years. While the case has taken a major step toward resolution, in January 2025, questions remain about what led to her tragic end, and the search for full justice continues. In March 1996, in Bonnie Lake, Washington, 14-year-old Jeffrey Klungness vanished the same day his mother, Susan, was found brutally slain in their family home. For more than 2 decades, his fate was unknown. Jeffrey Allen Klungness was born on December 9, 1981. He lived in Bonnie Lake, Washington, with his parents, Susan and Ronald Klungness. Physically, Jeffrey was recognized by a slight slouch in his walk, a small but noticeable trait. At 14 years old, he was enrolled in a private school where he performed well academically. Despite his generally mild demeanor, there were signs of internal conflict in Jeffrey's life. His home environment had become increasingly tense due to marital problems between his parents. One particular incident hinted at deeper emotional struggles. During a moment of anger, Jeffrey caused significant damage to his bedroom door, so much so that it had to be replaced. On March 2nd, 1996, a tragic and disturbing discovery was made in the Klungness family home. That day, Susan was found deceased inside the family's mobile home, located in the 20400 block of East 113th Street in Bonnie Lake, Washington. She had suffered multiple blunt force injuries and was presumed to have been beaten to her end with a heavy object. The fatal blow was to her head, marking a violent end to her life. Her son Jeffrey vanished that same day, adding a haunting layer of mystery to the case. The grim discovery was made by Susan's husband, Ron, who returned home from work between 4 o'clock and 4:30 in the afternoon. Upon arriving, Ron noticed that the front door to the home was unlocked and the television was on, though no one responded when he called out. Attempting to access his bedroom, he found the door jammed and unable to open it. It was not until around 6:30 p.m. that he managed to get the door open, only to find Susan's lifeless body slumped against it. Ron immediately contacted the police, who arrived shortly after to begin their investigation. As the officers examined the scene, they discovered that several personal items were missing from the home. Among the stolen belongings were Ron's gold watch and approximately $700 in cash, leading investigators to consider robbery as a possible motive. However, the presence of the TV left on and the unlocked front door added a layer of confusion to the crime scene. The last known communication with Jeffrey came from a phone call he had with his father at around 9:30 that morning. After that, he seemed to vanish without a trace. Early speculation considered whether Jeffrey might have run away or been involved in the crime. However, the investigators have since ruled out both theories. The authorities do not believe Jeffrey was responsible for Susan's demise. Instead, they suspect that he may have been the victim of foul play himself, possibly abducted by the same person who took the life of his mother. In the early hours of the following day, March 3rd, a critical clue emerged in the case. At approximately 4 a.m., Susan's maroon Toyota Camry station wagon, bearing the license plate number 093GHC, was found abandoned in the parking lot of a convenience store in Auburn, Washington. Later that same day, Martin S. Malcolm turned himself in to the authorities. Malcolm, a close family friend of the Klungnesses, admitted to withdrawing $300 from Susan's bank account the previous day. Witnesses had last seen Jeffrey in Malcolm's company, seated in the passenger seat of Susan's vehicle. Malcolm was observed driving Jeffrey around, making a bank withdrawal, and even taking him to get a haircut, all while using Susan's car. When questioned, Malcolm claimed that he panicked and fled in Susan's vehicle. His explanation for his actions remained vague and incomplete. He was subsequently arrested and charged with possession of stolen property, resulting in a 45-day jail sentence. Notably, he refused to cooperate further with law enforcement. He hired legal representation, declined to take a lie detector test, and would not provide any details about what had happened to Susan or Jeffrey. Suspicion surrounding Malcolm only deepened as investigators uncovered more about his past. By March 1996, it was clear that his presence in the Klungness household had become increasingly unwelcome. The family had grown uneasy with him, though the reasons were never fully disclosed. Malcolm's criminal background added a chilling dimension to the investigation. He had been convicted of second-degree slaying in 1980 for taking the life of his estranged wife and was released from prison in 1992. Despite this history and the circumstantial links to the case, Malcolm was never charged with Susan or Jeffrey's case, and the case went cold. In October 2017, 2 decades later, a significant discovery was made in the remote Greenwater area of unincorporated Pierce County. While foraging, mushroom pickers stumbled upon a skull fragment and reported it to the authorities. Initially, there were no immediate clues pointing to the identity of the remains, but advancements in DNA analysis eventually changed that. By August 2020, 3 years later, forensic specialists had extracted viable DNA from the skull fragment. Through genealogical comparison, it was confirmed that the DNA was related to Jeffrey Klungness's half-sister. Forensic analysis conclusively identified the skull fragment as belonging to Jeffrey Allen Klungness, who had been missing for more than 25 years. The forensic examination also determined Jeffrey's cause of demise. He had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to the head, consistent with a violent assault. The medical examiner officially ruled that his life was also ended, confirming long-held suspicions that Jeffrey had been slain around the same time as his mother, Susan, in March 1996. Following this confirmation, investigators revisited the primary suspect in the case, Martin S. Malcolm. Given the new evidence, a warrant was issued for his arrest. However, the authorities soon learned that Malcolm had passed away of natural causes in August 2022 in Thurston County at the age of 67. With his demise, any hope of a direct confession or further information about Jeffrey's final moments was lost. The Pierce County Prosecutor's Office confirmed in March 2025 that charges would have been filed if he were still alive. While some aspects of the investigation are still being finalized, officials have deemed the case resolved. Though the suspect would never face trial, the case reached a level of resolution that had long seemed out of reach. In February 2006 in India, a young mother and her newborn twin daughters were found brutally slain in their rented home. The scene was one of unimaginable horror. Despite an immediate investigation and promising leads, the case quickly grew cold and the suspects disappeared without a trace. Ranjini was born in 1981 in Alayaman, a village nestled in the Kollam district of Kerala, India. By her early 20s, Ranjini had entered into a relationship with Divil Kumar, a man from the same village. Divil served in the Indian Army, which lent him a certain standing and respect within their community. Their connection developed over time, and despite the limited details available about the nature of their relationship, it became serious enough to draw attention from those around them. However, the nature of their relationship began to shift when Ranjini became pregnant. This marked a turning point. Upon learning about the pregnancy, Divil's attitude towards her noticeably changed. He grew distant and indifferent, signaling a troubling shift in his commitment. Divil, unwilling to take responsibility, returned to his army post in Pathankot, distancing himself not only physically but emotionally from Ranjini. On January 24, 2006, Ranjini gave birth to twin daughters at a hospital in Thiruvananthapuram. Divil refused to acknowledge the children as his, firmly denying paternity. Determined to seek justice and hold him accountable, Ranjini approached the state government, urging them to intervene. Her efforts led to an official order requiring Divil to undergo a DNA test to establish whether he was indeed the father of the twins. On February 10th, just over 2 weeks after the birth of her twins, 24-year-old Ranjini and her newborn daughter's lifeless bodies were found in their rented home. Their throats had been slit, a scene of unimaginable violence and cruelty. It was Ranjini's mother, Santama, who discovered the horrific scene. Overcome with shock and disbelief, she immediately alerted the police. Police officers arrived promptly at the scene. The immediate area was cordoned off, and the investigation began in earnest. Amid the initial sweep of the home, the officers recovered an RC book, a registration certificate for a vehicle. At first glance, it did not appear to be a crucial piece of evidence. Still, the officers made note of it and decided to trace its origin, hoping it might lead to a breakthrough in the case. Upon tracing the RC book, the police identified its registered owner. When questioned, the individual revealed that he had handed over his two-wheeler to a resale shop located in Srikaryam, Thiruvananthapuram. The police quickly followed up at the shop, where the staff disclosed that the vehicle had been sold to 2 men. They described one as fair in complexion and the other as having a beard. Though vague, This description gave the investigators their first real lead. Based on the physical description and prior information, the police began to suspect that one of the men was Divil Kumar. His connection to Ranjini, the timing of the crime, and his recent denial of paternity all added to the suspicion. However, the identity of the second man remained a mystery. Further details began to emerge when Ranjini's mother, Santama, shared a crucial piece of information. She recalled a man named Anil, whom she had met at the hospital around the time of the twins' birth. This man had often visited their home afterward, offering assistance and appearing helpful to both her and Ranjini. As the investigation deepened, the authorities confirmed Divil Kumar's identity and involvement in the case. Cross-referencing details led to a chilling discovery. The man who had introduced himself as Anil was not who he claimed to be. The police concluded that it was an alias. During the course of the investigation, it came to light that one of the suspects had used an ATM, a detail that would prove to be a key turning point. Bank records traced to Pathankot revealed the identity of the second individual as Rajesh, a colleague of Divil in the Indian Army. With this information, the circle around the suspects began to tighten. Though both men were initially questioned by the police, they managed to slip through the cracks. Shortly after, Divil absconded, effectively disappearing from official reach. As the investigation stalled, the army formally declared both Divil and Rajesh as deserters. With no leads and the suspects evading justice, the case gradually faded from the spotlight and went cold. In 2010, after 4 long years of inaction and growing frustration, Santama approached the Kerala High Court and pleaded for a renewed investigation. As a result, the case was officially handed over to the Central Bureau of Investigation. Unlike earlier phases, the CBI utilized more advanced tools and resources to pick up the trail that had gone cold. A major breakthrough came years later, driven by a combination of advanced artificial intelligence technology and relentless detective work. The CBI's Technical Intelligence Wing used AI-generated facial mapping to create potential matches based on old photographs of the suspects. These digitally aged images were then compared with available photos on social media platforms, a method that had rarely been used in earlier stages of the case. The strategy paid off when a close visual match was found online. The AI-generated images aligned closely with photos on social media, which had gone unnoticed for years. This digital footprint, once dormant, reignited hope for justice. The match was strong enough to prompt immediate action. The CBI's Chennai unit was alerted and quickly moved in to verify the findings. On January 4, 2025, the Central Bureau of Investigation arrested the 2 primary suspects in Puducherry. After nearly 2 decades in hiding, Divil and Rajesh were found living under false identities. 42-year-old Divil had assumed the name Vishnu, while 48-year-old Rajesh went by the alias Praveen Kumar. The men had managed to build entirely new lives, working as interior designers, and even marrying local school teachers, blending into the fabric of their adopted community without suspicion. It was revealed that Rajesh had manipulated Santama, Ranjini's mother, in the days leading up to the crime. Under the pretense of assisting her with official paperwork, Rajesh took her to the local Panchayat office, claiming he would help obtain birth certificates for the newborn twins. This deception was carefully planned, meant to remove Santama from the home and leave Ranjini and the babies vulnerable. While Santama was away, Rajesh returned to the house. Following their arrest, Divil and Rajesh were immediately taken into custody. The court remanded them to judicial custody, marking a crucial step in holding them accountable for the crimes. After nearly 2 decades, their family finally has a measure of closure. While the pain of their loss remains, the path to justice has begun. In the late 1880s, London's Whitechapel district was gripped by terror as a string of brutal crimes shook the city. 5 women's lives were ended in a way so savage, it left the world questioning the identity of the perpetrator for over a century. Known only as Jack the Ripper, The perpetrator's identity remained a chilling mystery, evading capture despite extensive investigations and police efforts. Between 1888 and 1891, the demises of 11 women were linked together under a single police investigation known as the Whitechapel cases in the Whitechapel district in the East End of London, England. These crimes shared various characteristics, including the method of attack and the social circumstances of the victims. 7 of the women had their throats slashed, while 4 were found with their bodies mutilated after demise, painting a horrifying pattern of violence in the area. Out of the 11 cases, 5 crimes committed between August and November of 1888 displayed such consistent and distinctive details that the investigators believed them to be the work of a single individual. This unknown perpetrator would later become famously known as Jack the Ripper. Despite the extensive police efforts to track down the perpetrator, the Ripper was never identified, and the mystery surrounding his identity endured for decades. Years after the crime ceased, documents surfaced that revealed internal suspicions within the police force. Among these was a reference to a man identified only as Kozminski. This name would eventually be connected to Aron Kozminski. The files indicated that several officials at the time had considered him a possible suspect, though no formal charges were ever brought against him. These suspicions remained buried in historical records for many years before drawing public attention. Aron Kozminski was born on September 11, 1865, in the town of Kłodawa, located in Congress, Poland, then under the control of the Russian Empire. He was the son of Abram Józef Kozminski, who worked as a tailor, and his wife, Golda Lubnowska. Aron grew up in a Jewish family during a period of political unrest and societal tension within the region. Little is documented about Kozminski's early life in Poland, but it is believed that he may have been employed in a hospital setting. During the time that the crimes took place, Aron is believed to have been residing either on Providence Street or Greenfield Street. Both of these locations lie in close proximity to the crime scene, placing him within walking distance. In 1891, Aron was admitted to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum following behavior that suggested severe mental illness. Among the symptoms noted were auditory hallucinations and a pattern of self-neglect, both of which pointed to a deteriorating psychological state. Prior to his admittance, he had reportedly threatened a woman, either his own sister or the sister of a witness involved in the process, with a knife. Another documented incident occurred in January 1892, when he brandished a chair at an asylum attendant. These 2 episodes stand as the only known records of violent conduct during his lifetime. While in the asylum, Aron showed a preference for speaking in Yiddish, his native language. This linguistic choice implied that his command of English was limited, raising questions about his ability to interact with English-speaking women in the manner Jack the Ripper was believed to have done. This language barrier has been cited by some as a significant factor against the likelihood of his involvement in the crimes. After spending 3 years at Colney Hatch, Aron was transferred on April 19, 1894, to Leavesden Asylum. During his time at Leavesden, he remained institutionalized, with no further recorded episodes of violence. His life quietly continued within the asylum's walls until his demise in 1919. In 2014, renewed attention was drawn to Aron when a DNA analysis was conducted on a shawl reportedly found at the crime scene of Catherine Edowis, the 4th victim in the series of crimes attributed to Jack the Ripper. The DNA evidence from the shawl was said to match genetic material from living descendants of both Catherine and Aron. The shawl, described as stained and bloodied, had allegedly been taken from the original crime scene and passed down through generations before surfacing at an auction. It was purchased by author Russell Edwards, who sought to validate its connection to the case. He commissioned Dr. Jari Luhalainen to conduct DNA testing in hopes of solving the mystery once and for all. Critics pointed out that the DNA findings had not undergone the necessary peer reviews typically required in scientific research. weakening their credibility in academic and forensic communities. In an effort to address these concerns, additional DNA testing was carried out in 2019 by Liverpool John Moores University and the University of Leeds. These follow-up studies reaffirmed that the genetic material found on the shawl matched the profiles of modern-day relatives of both Kathryn and Aron. One of the main arguments against the DNA evidence is that the genetic markers identified are not unique. The mystery of Jack the Ripper may never be fully resolved, but the name of Aron Kozminski has sparked new debates and reopened old wounds. Whether he was truly the infamous perpetrator or simply a man whose name was tied to a chilling legacy, the case remains one of the most baffling and disturbing in criminal history. In 2025, a published paper titled Forensic Investigation of a Shawl Linked to the Jack the Ripper Crimes and published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences addresses these concerns and, most importantly, matches the DNA found at the crime scene to samples taken from living descendants of both Aron and Christina. Author Edwards said that a letter has been sent to the Attorney General requesting permission to go to the High Court and initiate the legal process to reopen the case. He said, "We now know the name, and we have placed the perpetrator at the crime scene. Now we want that to be public knowledge, though, accepted by the courts." A woman vanished after a phone call in February 1991, claiming to be in North Carolina. Despite no further contact, her disappearance remained a mystery for nearly 3 decades. On July 18, 1996, the police responded to a grim discovery in a wooded area near the Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, North Carolina. Human skeletal remains had been found, partially concealed by the dense foliage. The location, situated in a relatively secluded area, offered little in terms of immediate clues. The investigators secured the scene and began the process of collecting evidence, hopeful that the remains would soon be identified. The skeletal remains were transported to the Mecklenburg County Medical Examiner's Office for examination. After thorough analysis, the remains were confirmed to be those of a woman. The condition of the body suggested that it had been there for quite some time, and the medical examiner determined that her life was ended. However, due to the state of decomposition and lack of personal identification, authorities were left with more questions than answers. Detectives launched an investigation to try and uncover the identity of the woman. They employed all available conventional methods, including checking missing persons reports, dental records, and any identifying features that might link her to a known individual. Despite these efforts, they were unable to make a match, and the case eventually grew cold. After almost 3 decades, in 2022, the investigators revisited the decades-old case with renewed determination. The skeletal remains were sent to Raleigh for an osteological examination. Recognizing the potential of genetic technology, authorities partnered with the Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Foundation to pursue advanced DNA analysis. With their support, a portion of the woman's bones was sent to Othram. The first attempt at DNA extraction, however, was unsuccessful. The condition of the remains, having been exposed to the elements for years, had severely compromised the integrity of the genetic material. In 2024, the woman's bones were sent once again for DNA extraction. This time, experts utilized the most recent advancements in technology. The DNA data was uploaded into 2 consumer genealogy databases, GEDmatch and Family Tree DNA. To analyze the genetic leads, the CMPD Cold Case Unit partnered with Ramapo College of New Jersey's Investigative Genetic Genealogy Center. Their research quickly yielded a breakthrough in April 2025. The remains belonged to Betty Jean Benton. Detectives reached out to Betty's surviving family members to share the development and gather additional information. The family confirmed that they had not heard from Betty since the early 1990s, consistent with the timeline of the unidentified woman's last known whereabouts. To solidify the identification, a DNA sample was collected from one of Betty's relatives and compared to the profile from the remains. The match was confirmed, After nearly 30 years, the woman discovered in the wooded area near Bank of America Stadium was officially identified as Betty Jean Benton. Betty was born on February 27, 1954, in the state of Louisiana. Although she came into the world in the South, she spent the majority of her life in Chicago, Illinois. In February 1991, Betty reached out to her family. During that conversation, she informed them that she was in North Carolina. This would ultimately become the final time anyone in her family heard from her. There were no indications that anything was wrong during the call, but after that point, all contact ceased without explanation. Following the abrupt silence, concern within the family began to grow. They waited, hoping to hear from her again, but no further communication came. After months passed with no word, Betty was officially reported missing in 1992. No paper trail, no lease, employment, or identification has been discovered that links her to any specific location within North Carolina. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Cold Case Unit continues to investigate the circumstances of her demise. In the summer of 1988, a transgender woman vanished from Lexington, Kentucky, after a prostitution charge was dropped. Her remains were discovered months later in Florida. She became Julie Doe, a nameless victim. Decades passed before DNA testing and forensic work revealed her true identity. On September 25, 1988, a man searching for lumber made a grim discovery off County Road 474, near the border of Lake and Polk counties in Florida. While walking through the area, he came across human remains lying just off the roadway. Startled by the sight, he quickly contacted law enforcement to report what he had found. The authorities responded promptly, arriving at the scene to begin a formal investigation into the circumstances surrounding the body's presence. Upon arrival, the investigators examined the scene closely. The victim was found wearing a bluish-green tank top and an acid-washed denim skirt. The police observed that the victim's pantyhose had been partially removed, raising the possibility that an indecent assault may have occurred. The absence of shoes, jewelry, or any form of personal identification added to the growing suspicion that foul play was involved. The immediate surroundings yielded no clues to the victim's identity. There were no belongings or items nearby that might have offered insight into who she was or how she ended up there. The investigators noted that the condition of the remains and the secluded location suggested the body may have been deliberately placed at the site. Due to the advanced decomposition, authorities were unable to determine an exact time of demise, though it was estimated to have occurred anywhere from 2 weeks to 8 months prior to discovery. The condition of the remains made visual identification impossible. Without external injuries or clear trauma, it was difficult for officials to piece together the sequence of events leading to her demise. The following morning, an autopsy was conducted at the C.A. Pound Human Identification Laboratory in Gainesville, Florida. Experts hoped the examination would reveal more definitive answers about the cause of demise and perhaps yield clues to the victim's identity. However, the autopsy failed to provide a clear cause of demise, leaving the medical examiner without a conclusive explanation for how or why the woman had lost her life. Further examination of the victim's remains revealed that she had undergone multiple cosmetic surgeries. She had 250 cc silicone breast implants, a size considered proportionate to her frame. The investigators suggested the procedure could have taken place in major metropolitan areas known for plastic surgery practices, such as Atlanta, Miami, New Orleans, New York City, or various locations in California. These implants, which had been discontinued around 1983, led experts to estimate that the surgery was performed around 1984. In addition to breast augmentation, the victim also appeared to have undergone rhinoplasty. This surgical alteration to the nose may have been cosmetic or a corrective procedure related to a previous nasal injury. These surgeries further pointed to the victim's efforts to affirm her gender identity through medical transition, which was considerably less common and far more stigmatized in the 1980s than it is today. Initially, medical professionals examining the remains believed the victim was a cisgender woman. This belief stemmed from certain physical characteristics, including pitting on the pelvic bones, which is often associated with hormonal changes typically seen in individuals who have experienced pregnancy. However, this assumption was later disproven after advanced DNA testing. In 2015, almost 3 decades later, DNA analysis revealed that the victim possessed XY chromosomes, confirming that she had been assigned male at birth. The presence of hormone replacement therapy in her system had caused subtle skeletal changes, which initially led to the incorrect conclusion regarding pregnancy. With no identification found at the scene, a forensic sketch was created to approximate what she may have looked like in life. In July 2018, additional forensic work was conducted by the University of South Florida in Tampa. Isotopic testing was performed on samples taken from the victim's skull, with the goal of narrowing down regions where she may have lived. Results from these tests pointed towards southern Florida as her likely place of origin, adding weight to the theory that she had spent much of her life in the state, despite having ancestral roots in Kentucky. Law enforcement officials working the case began to publicly acknowledge the difficulties she likely faced as a transgender woman during the 1980s. Other investigators speculated that rejection or estrangement from family could have left her socially isolated, which may explain why no missing persons reports matched her description for decades. After it was determined that the victim was a transgender woman, the sheriff's department commissioned a new forensic sketch. This updated rendering was developed from the structure of her skull and was intended to more accurately reflect her gender presentation. Then, after another 6 years, in September 2024, a breakthrough came when the DNA DOE project revealed that the victim had ancestral connections to central Kentucky. Specifically, her lineage was traced to Madison, Fayette, Garrett, and Mercer counties. This information significantly narrowed the geographic scope for the investigators seeking to identify her and offered a stronger lead on her origins. Despite her genetic links to central Kentucky, records and data suggested that the victim had lived most of her life in Florida. This geographical separation hinted at the possibility that she had not been raised by her biological family. Shortly after the discovery of the unidentified remains, the authorities collected fingerprints in an attempt to establish the victim's identity. After years of determined work by forensic genealogists, significant progress was made. Using advanced genetic techniques, researchers identified potential relatives of the victim, who had long been referred to as Julie Doe. The Lake County Sheriff's Office reached out to these individuals, and, after gathering more information, DNA samples were submitted for comparison. On March 10, 2025, the long-standing mystery was finally resolved when the remains were officially identified as those of Pamela Leigh Walton. Pamela was born on May 13, 1963, in the state of Kentucky. Assigned male at birth, she was put up for adoption at the age of 5. After being adopted, her name was legally changed to Leigh Allen Walton. As an adult, Leigh transitioned and began living as Pamela Leigh Walton. She identified as a transgender woman. Pamela's early life and background were marked by numerous challenges, particularly those linked to her gender identity. She experienced ridicule and exclusion, including derogatory references made in her high school yearbooks. A particularly haunting detail from her past included a pre-carved headstone that still bore her former name, symbolizing both a rejection of her chosen identity and a painful reminder of the discrimination she endured. In the mid-1980s, Pamela became estranged from her adoptive family following a dispute involving a theft from a family member. This falling out appeared to deepen the divide between her and the people who had once taken her in. Around July 6, 1988, Pamela was arrested in Lexington, Kentucky on a single charge of prostitution. While the solicitation portion of the charge was eventually dropped, the arrest stands as one of the last verified moments in her known timeline. Following her arrest, Pamela vanished without a trace. No one heard from her again, and despite time passing, her whereabouts remained unknown. Despite confirming her identity, many questions remain unanswered. It is still unknown how Pamela came to be in the area of Florida where her body was discovered. Furthermore, her exact cause and manner of demise remain undetermined. The Lake County Sheriff's Office has stated that efforts are ongoing to gather more information about the circumstances that led to Pamela's demise, as the investigators continue seeking answers to complete the story of her life and final days. In March 1979, a woman joined her co-workers for a casual dinner in Washington, D.C. But the next day, her body was found. A discarded plastic fork would reveal the identity of her perpetrator, uncovering a chilling secret that had been buried for over 4 decades. Kathryn Donohue was born in 1948 in Allentown, Pennsylvania, where she spent her early years before relocating to the Washington, D.C. area. Described by her family as an outgoing young lady, Kathryn was affectionately known as Kathy. The move was work-related, marking the beginning of her adult life in a new environment. She found employment as a secretary and settled in Arlington, Virginia, just across the river from the capital. On the night of March 2, 1979, 31-year-old Kathryn joined a group of colleagues for dinner, a casual outing that fit comfortably into the rhythm of her normal routine. It was not a special occasion or an unusual event, just a gathering among coworkers after a day at work. Nothing about that night suggested anything out of the ordinary. The following day, on March 3rd, a grim discovery was made by a local resident in Glenarden, Maryland. While going about their day, the individual stumbled upon a body lying in a parking lot behind a building located on Martin Luther King Jr. Highway. Disturbed by the sight, they immediately contacted the police, prompting a swift response from law enforcement. Upon arrival, the authorities quickly identified the victim as Kathryn Donohue. The location where Kathryn was found was roughly 15 miles from her residence in Arlington. Her body bore the marks of extreme violence. She had been brutally indecently assaulted and strangled. It was clear to the investigators that her demise had not been accidental. The parking lot setting, isolated and away from regular foot traffic, added a chilling layer of premeditation to the crime. The police wasted no time launching a full investigation into the case. They retraced Kathryn's last known movements, attempting to piece together the hours following her dinner with coworkers. One key detail soon emerged. A cab driver had reportedly been hired to take her home that night. However, efforts to locate this individual yielded nothing. The cab driver had vanished, and with him, a potential lead in the case. The investigators combed through available evidence and conducted interviews, hoping to find any clue that might point to the person responsible. But despite their determination, no substantial progress was made. The violent and senseless crime against Kathryn slipped into the category of unsolved crimes, her file joining a growing list of cold cases from the era. In late 2024, after 45 years, the decades-old mystery saw a significant breakthrough. After years of stalled progress, investigators received a DNA hit that reignited the case. The turning point came with the application of forensic genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge technique allowed the authorities to analyze preserved DNA evidence from the original crime scene with a level of precision that had not been possible in 1979. The FBI, working in conjunction with the Prince George's County Police Department, used this advanced approach to identify a potential familial connection to their long-sought suspect. By narrowing down the genetic data and following the links through publicly available genealogical records, the investigators were eventually led to a relative of the man they believed was responsible. It was this discovery that brought them to the door of Roger Zodis Brown, an 82-year-old man living in Pinehurst, North Carolina. To confirm their suspicion, the authorities launched a covert operation to collect a DNA sample from Brown without his knowledge. They recovered a plastic fork from his household trash, an ordinary object that would soon prove to be a critical piece of evidence. The fork was sent for testing and analyzed against the preserved DNA sample found on Kathryn's clothing decades earlier. The results were conclusive. DNA from the plastic fork matched the sample taken from Kathryn's slip at the crime scene, leaving no doubt that Brown's genetic profile was a direct match. With the DNA evidence in hand, investigators were finally able to connect the dots. In March 2025, Brown was arrested at his residence in Pinehurst, North Carolina. He was taken into custody and formally charged in the first degree. As investigators dug into Brown's background, they uncovered a criminal history that added further weight to the charges. In 1967, he had been arrested for armed robbery in Nassau County, New York, and subsequently served an 11-year prison sentence. He was released in June 1978, just 9 months before Kathryn was found deceased. The timeline placed him back in society with the opportunity to commit the crime shortly after his release. Despite thorough investigation, the authorities found no apparent connection between Brown and Kathryn. There was no evidence to suggest the two had ever met, nor any known reason for their paths to have crossed. This absence of a personal link pointed to the disturbing likelihood that the crime had been a random act of violence. When the officers arrived to arrest him, Brown reportedly showed no emotion. The police described him as solemn and cold, stating that he displayed no reaction upon learning of the charges against him. Following his arrest, Brown was placed in custody in North Carolina, where he remains while awaiting extradition to Maryland. Legal proceedings are already underway to transfer him to Prince George's County, where he will face formal prosecution. If convicted, Roger Brown faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison without the chance of parole. Chief of Police Malik Aziz said, "Today, we took a major step towards bringing justice to Kathy and closure for her family. This case serves as a reminder that we will never give up seeking the truth, no matter how much time has passed. Many of Kathryn's loved ones have passed away, but the arrest brought closure to her brother and sister." Kathryn's family issued a statement thanking investigators for their commitment to getting justice. They said, "The entire Donohue family would like to express our deepest gratitude to everyone involved in this investigation, especially the men and women in the Prince George's County Police Department, for their tireless efforts and unwavering dedication to seeking justice. We will always be grateful for their determination, their compassion, and their relentless pursuit of the truth, which has finally given us a sense of closure that we never thought possible after all this time." In December 1996, in the quiet community of Evans Crossroads, North Carolina, a 45-year-old woman was found brutally stabbed to her end in her own home. For nearly 3 decades, her loved ones were left without justice, haunted by the brutal nature of her demise and the silence that followed. Margaret Lois Bell was born in 1951, and by the time she reached her mid-40s, she had become a familiar and cherished member of her community in Evans Crossroads near Rowland, North Carolina. At 45 years old, Margaret lived alone, her children grown and living their own lives. On December 4th, 1996, Margaret's body was discovered in her home on Tom M. Road. The discovery came when one of her neighbors, a resident of the area, entered her home and found her lifeless body. Shocked and horrified by the grim sight, the neighbor immediately alerted the authorities. Upon arriving at the scene, the investigators found that Margaret had suffered multiple stab wounds, which indicated a brutal and violent end to her life. The circumstances surrounding her demise were alarming, and the authorities quickly classified that her life was ended. Given the brutality of the attack, the police were eager to determine what had happened to Margaret and who might be responsible. In the days following the discovery, the investigation unfolded with urgency. Detectives scoured Margaret's home for any signs of a struggle or potential evidence that could point to a suspect. However, the lack of definitive evidence or eyewitnesses left law enforcement at a standstill, and eventually the case went cold. Family and friends of Margaret struggled to understand why anyone would want to harm her, as there had been no prior signs of danger or conflict in her life. A significant breakthrough finally emerged in the long-dormant investigation after 25 years. In April 2021, investigators executed a search warrant and successfully obtained a DNA sample from a man named Kenneth Delton Locklear. The decision to pursue DNA from Locklear was not arbitrary. It was based on the careful re-examination of past leads that had once gone cold. By early 2024, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Investigative Unit intensified their efforts by reviewing preserved evidence from the original crime scene. Recognizing the potential in modern forensic methods, the investigators submitted critical items for reanalysis. The results proved to be pivotal. Not only did the DNA evidence match, but additional leads reinforced Locklear's connection to the case. He was not a stranger to Margaret. He was her former son-in-law. The connection between Margaret and Locklear brought new clarity to the case and raised painful questions for those who had once considered him part of their family. Authorities began to reconstruct the timeline and dynamics of Locklear's relationship with Margaret, searching for a motive that could explain such a brutal act. Although he had been part of her life in the past through marriage, nothing had previously indicated that he posed a threat. His name had surfaced during early stages of the investigation, but without evidence, no charges had been filed. In February 2025, Locklear was officially arrested and charged in the first degree. After nearly 3 decades of unanswered questions and silent grief, the Robeson County Sheriff's Office announced the arrest, bringing long-awaited relief to Margaret's family and the broader Evans Crossroads community. Alice Bell spoke during the news conference and thanked the sheriff's office for their hard work. She said, "Margaret Lois Bell's story does not end with tragedy. It ends with justice. And today, we take one step closer to that reality." Robeson County Sheriff Bernice Wilkins said, "We have been successful in breathing new life into other cold cases, to include this one over the last few years. As technology and science continue to evolve, cases such as this have a better chance of being solved. This arrest should serve as a message to those that have evaded accountability for heinous crimes, that we are not giving up in seeking justice and closure for grieving families." He said that Margaret's mother recently passed away, and he hoped they would have made the announcement of the case being solved before her passing. He said, "What I really wish that we could have done. It is my understanding her mother and some other siblings has passed away in the past 2 weeks. I wish she had been alive today to see this herself." A bond hearing was held for Locklear at the Robeson County Courthouse. A judge appointed a public defender for Locklear, but denied his bond. Margaret's son, Eric Dial, reflecting on the pain his family had carried for so many years, spoke from the heart. He said, "Out of 28 years waiting, just searching, but it has been a burden off our hearts. Right now, she is in heaven. She is in heaven rejoicing." On April 18th, it was announced that Locklear passed away at the jail. The cause of demise must still be confirmed. In March 1992, a 19-year-old man left his quiet suburban life in Falls Church, Virginia, and stepped into the heart of Washington, D.C., never to return. Ricardo Burbano was born in 1973. At 19 years old, he lived in Falls Church, Virginia, located just outside of Washington, D.C., in Fairfax County. At the end of March 1992, Ricardo was dropped off by a friend at an apartment located on Q Street Northwest. Neither Ricardo nor his friend could have foreseen what would unfold next. On March 31st, 1992, officers with the Prince George's County Police Department responded to a grim discovery in the rear of a property in Hyattsville, Maryland. There, they found an unconscious adult male lying unresponsive. Upon assessment, The victim displayed no signs consistent with life. Emergency responders confirmed his demise at the scene before transporting the body to the office of the chief medical examiner in Baltimore, Maryland, for further examination. The medical examiner's findings were both disturbing and definitive. The cause of demise was attributed to a combination of strangulation, multiple stab and cut wounds, and blunt force trauma. These injuries painted a picture of a violent and sustained assault. The manner of demise confirmed that the victim's end had been intentional and brutal. Shortly after, the victim was identified as 19-year-old Ricardo Burbano. Further investigation revealed that the actual crime had taken place a day earlier, on March 30th. The authorities determined the crime scene to be inside a residence located in the 100 block of Q Street, Northwest, the same location where Ricardo had last been seen. Despite efforts by detectives to gather evidence and pursue leads, no suspects were identified. With no significant breakthroughs and no one held accountable, the investigation eventually went cold. On August 24th, 2022, after 3 decades of silence, a major development emerged in the cold case. Members of the Metropolitan Police Department's cold case unit identified a suspect. Following their investigation, an arrest warrant was issued for 47-year-old Ron Wright, a resident of Wimauma, Florida. On October 20th, Wright was extradited to Washington, D.C., where he faced first-degree charges. Blood found on a carpet in Wright's living room in 1992 had been positively identified as Ricardo's. The detectives continued to dig deeper, following leads and re-examining old evidence. Their persistence led to the identification of a second suspect. This time, they focused on 54-year-old Tyrone Long, a resident of Northwest Washington, D.C. The connection between Long and the events of March 1992 soon became the next focal point of their revived investigation. On April 1st, 2025, under a D.C. Superior Court grand jury indictment, members of the United States Marshals located and arrested 54-year-old Long. Long was taken into custody without incident, marking the end of a long search. After his arrest, Long was transported to the Metropolitan Police Department's branch. There, he was formally charged in the first degree. The arrests of both Ron Wright and Tyrone Long breathed new life into a case that had once gone cold.